Imagine deliberately choosing to sleep on the cold, hard floor tonight, not because you have to, not because something went wrong, but because you want to. Imagine skipping your meals, walking outside in freezing weather with minimal clothing, or wearing rough, uncomfortable clothes, all on purpose. Sounds a little crazy, right? But here's the thing. Some of the most powerful, mentally resilient human beings in history did exactly this, every single day. These were not monks hiding in caves. These were emperors, generals, lawyers, and politicians. These were the Stoics. And today, we're going to go deep into how and why they trained themselves to be comfortable with discomfort. And more importantly, what you and I can learn from them right now in the modern world.
Before we get into the training methods, let's quickly understand who we're talking about. Stoicism is one of the oldest and most practical philosophies ever developed. It started in ancient Greece around 300 BC with a man named Zeno of Citium, but it truly exploded in Rome with names you've probably heard. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, Seneca, the brilliant writer and advisor to emperors, and Epictetus, a man who was born into slavery and yet became one of the most free-minded individuals who ever lived. These were not soft, theoretical philosophies sitting in ivory towers. These were people dealing with war, political betrayal, poverty, illness, and death. And they built a philosophy specifically designed to help human beings survive and thrive through hardship. Their core belief: your mind is everything. And your mind, like your body, must be trained.
Here's what most people get wrong about Stoicism. They think it's about suppressing your emotions, about pretending you don't feel pain or sadness or fear. That's not it at all. The Stoics weren't trying to become emotionless robots. They were trying to become masters of their own reactions. The philosophy behind voluntary discomfort is actually quite simple and powerful. If you only ever live in comfort, then the moment discomfort arrives, and it will arrive, you will be completely unprepared. You'll panic, you'll collapse, you'll lose your mind. But if you regularly and deliberately expose yourself to discomfort, something incredible happens. Your threshold for suffering rises. Your fear of losing comfort shrinks. And you begin to realize that most of what you were afraid of losing was never really necessary in the first place. Let's talk about Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, advisor to Emperor Nero, owner of multiple villas, a man of extraordinary luxury. And yet, once a month, Seneca would voluntarily strip away all of that wealth. He would wear the roughest, cheapest clothing he could find. He would eat the most basic, plain food available: bread, water, whatever the poorest Romans ate. He would sleep on a simple mat, and he would live like this for several days. His friends thought he was mad, but Seneca had a very specific reason. He wrote about this practice in his letters, explaining that he wanted to ask himself one simple question during these days. Is this the condition that I so feared? And almost every time, his answer was, no, it wasn't that bad. In fact, it was manageable. That realization was more valuable to him than any amount of gold. The Stoics had a formal practice for this kind of mental exercise. They called it Premeditatio Malorum, which translates to the premeditation of evils, or in modern language, negative visualization. Here's how it works. Every morning, or at regular intervals, you deliberately imagine the worst things that could happen to you. You imagine losing your job. You imagine losing your health. You imagine losing someone you love. You imagine living without your home, your money, your status. Not to be depressing,
but to prepare. Because the Stoics believed that the human mind has a terrible habit of taking good things for granted. We stop appreciating what we have the moment we get used to it. But when you regularly remind yourself that these things could be taken away, your gratitude explodes, your fear of loss shrinks, and your ability to cope with actual hardship dramatically increases.
Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the known world for nearly 2 decades. He commanded the Roman Empire. He had every luxury imaginable at his fingertips. But read his personal journal, the book we now call Meditations, and you'll find something remarkable. He constantly reminded himself not to indulge. He wrote about the importance of waking up early, even when his bed was warm and comfortable. He wrote about eating simply, training physically, and avoiding the softness that came so easily to those in power. He was deeply aware of a trap that wealth and power set, the trap of becoming so comfortable that you lose your edge, your discipline, your character. So he deliberately chose to resist comfort wherever he could, not because he hated pleasure, but because he understood what unchecked pleasure does to a human being over time.
If anyone had the right to be broken by life, it was Epictetus. He was born a slave. He had no freedom, no rights, no future, at least not in the conventional sense. At some point in his life, his master, a cruel man named Epictetus, began twisting his leg, apparently as some kind of test or punishment. According to historical accounts, Epictetus calmly said, "You're going to break it." The master continued. The leg broke. Epictetus simply said, "Did I not tell you?" He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And yet this man went on to become one of the most celebrated philosophers in history. His students included some of the most powerful Romans of his time. His teachings were so profound that Marcus Aurelius studied them personally. Epictetus didn't just talk about being comfortable with discomfort, he lived it at a level most of us will never have to face. One of the core ideas in Stoicism that makes the discomfort training make sense is what they called the dichotomy of control. In simple terms, there are things in your control and things that are not. What's in your control? Your thoughts, your choices, your reactions, your character. That's it. Everything else, your reputation, your wealth, your health, other people's opinions, the weather, the economy, none of that is truly in your control. And this distinction is not just philosophical, it's incredibly practical. Because once you truly internalize this, you stop spending your mental energy fighting things you cannot change. Instead, you focus everything on the one thing you can control, how you respond. And voluntary discomfort is a training ground for that response. Every time you choose difficulty on purpose, you are practicing control over the one domain that actually belongs to you.
Here's something the Stoics understood, that our modern world desperately needs to hear. Comfort is not neutral. Comfort is not just the absence of suffering. Comfort, when it becomes the primary goal of your life, is actually one of the most dangerous things you can pursue. Think about it. Every addiction begins as comfort. Every avoidance behavior begins as comfort. Every relationship that slowly falls apart does so because someone chose comfort over the difficult conversation, the honest moment, the necessary change. The Stoics saw this clearly. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, but he also wrote that softness of life leads to weakness of mind. When everything is easy, we lose our capacity for difficulty. And life, real life, is full of difficulty. The question is never whether hard times will come.
The question is whether you'll be ready when they do. Let's get specific about the actual practices. The Stoics didn't just philosophize, they trained. Physically, regularly, deliberately. Cold exposure was common. Philosophers and their students would often walk, sit, or train in cold weather with minimal clothing, not as a punishment, but as a practice. Hunger was another tool. Voluntary fasting, or simply eating far less than they wanted, was practiced regularly. The goal was always the same: to test themselves, to ask, can I function without this? Am I slave to this comfort, or do I own my own mind? Interestingly, modern science now backs up much of what the Stoics were doing intuitively. Cold exposure has been shown to improve mood, reduce inflammation, and build mental resilience. Intermittent fasting has well-documented benefits for metabolism and brain function. The Stoics didn't have the science, but they had the results. So what does Stoic discomfort training look like for someone living in the 21st century? You don't need to sleep on a stone floor or walk through a blizzard in sandals, but the principle is the same. Take cold showers instead of hot ones, not because it's trendy, but to practice choosing discomfort deliberately. Skip a meal occasionally. Wake up earlier than you need to. Do the workout when you absolutely don't want to. Have the honest conversation you've been avoiding for months. Say no to the easy option when you know the harder path will build you. These are not extreme acts. They are small, daily choices that accumulate into something extraordinary. A mind that doesn't flinch, a character that doesn't crack under pressure, and a life built on genuine strength rather than the illusion of comfort. The Stoics made a fascinating observation about fear. They noticed that humans are almost always more afraid of losing something than they are troubled by actually losing it. The anticipation of loss is usually far worse than the loss itself. This is actually confirmed by modern psychology. It's called loss aversion. We feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as strongly as we feel the pleasure of gaining the same thing. The Stoic solution? Remove the anticipation. Practice the loss before it happens. Voluntarily give up something you value for a short period. Experience what it's like to live without it. Not only does this shrink your fear of losing it, it also helps you realize how much of what you cling to you don't actually need. This is deeply liberating. It transforms your relationship with everything you own, everything you want, and everything you fear losing. One of the most powerful and practical tools the Stoics used was journaling. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is literally his personal journal, never intended to be published. Seneca wrote thousands of letters that were essentially philosophical reflections. Epictetus kept detailed records of his teachings. The Stoics understood something powerful about writing. It forces clarity. When you write down your fears, your reactions, your discomforts, they become smaller and more manageable. Writing creates distance between you and your emotions, and that distance is exactly what the Stoics were training for. If you want to bring Stoic discomfort training into your life today, start with 5 minutes of journaling every morning. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of today? What am I avoiding? What would I do if I weren't afraid? These simple questions, written honestly, can transform your inner life over time. One thing that often gets overlooked about the Stoics is that they didn't do this alone. Stoicism was practiced in communities, in schools, in conversations, in ongoing relationships where people held each other accountable. Seneca had deep friendships where he and his peers would challenge and push each other. Marcus Aurelius surrounded himself with advisors who were given explicit permission to tell him the truth. Epictetus ran a school where students lived, studied, and practiced together. This is important because the modern self-help culture often treats personal development as a solo journey. But real growth, the kind the Stoics pursued, requires community. It requires someone who will call you out when you're being soft, who will practice alongside you, who will remind you of your commitments when you want to quit. Perhaps the most beautiful and radical concept in all of Stoicism is Amor Fati, love your fate. This goes beyond simply accepting hardship. It's about actually embracing it, loving it, welcoming it. Not in a masochistic way, but in a deeply philosophical way. The Stoics believed that everything that happens, including pain, loss, failure, humiliation, is exactly what was needed for your growth. Every difficulty is the curriculum. Every setback is the teacher. Every moment of discomfort is an opportunity. When Marcus Aurelius faced war after war, when Seneca was exiled, when Epictetus broke his leg in slavery, they didn't just endure these things. They looked for the gift inside them. And this reframe, this complete shift in perspective, is what gave them their extraordinary resilience. Not just acceptance, gratitude, even for the hard things. Let's talk science for a moment, because the Stoics were doing something neurologically profound. They just didn't have the vocabulary to describe it. Every time you deliberately choose discomfort, your brain gets a signal. That signal essentially says, this is safe. Discomfort is survivable. Over time, repeated exposure to voluntary discomfort actually rewires the neural pathways associated with stress and fear. Your amygdala, the part of the brain that triggers the fight or flight response, becomes less reactive. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational decision-making, becomes stronger. In practical terms, this means you become less reactive, less anxious, less overwhelmed by the everyday difficulties of life. You start to respond rather than react. You start to think before you act. These are exactly the qualities the Stoics were training for, centuries before neuroscience could explain why they worked. We live in a world that has been specifically engineered to eliminate all discomfort. Don't want to cook? Delivery arrives in 30 minutes. Don't want to be bored? Here's infinite content on your phone. Don't want to be cold? Your house is climate controlled to the exact degree you prefer. Don't want to face a hard conversation? Send a text. And on the surface, this seems wonderful. This is progress, right? But here's the hidden cost. When every discomfort is immediately removed, you never develop the mental muscle to handle the discomforts that can't be removed. Real grief, real loss, real failure, real loneliness, real hardship. These things will still come for you, no matter how many apps you have. And when they do, if you've never practiced sitting with discomfort, if your entire life has been optimized for ease, you will be completely unprepared. The Stoics would look at our world and see tremendous material wealth and tremendous psychological fragility existing side by side. So, how do you actually start? Here is a simple, practical framework you can begin this week. First, identify one comfort you rely on too heavily. Maybe it's your phone first thing in the morning. Maybe it's always choosing the easiest food option. Maybe it's avoiding difficult conversations. Pick one. Second, remove or reduce that comfort deliberately for 1 week. Not forever, just for 1 week.
Pay close attention to what you feel. Notice the discomfort. Breathe through it. Don't fix it immediately. Third, journal about the experience for 5 minutes each evening. What came up? What did you learn about yourself? Was it as bad as you feared? And fourth, at the end of the week, decide whether to continue, escalate, or choose a new comfort to examine. This is the practice. Simple, sustainable, transformative.
The Stoic approach to discomfort isn't just ancient history. It's being used today by some of the most high-performing people on the planet. Navy SEALs use a version of voluntary discomfort in their training, deliberately exposing candidates to cold, exhaustion, and sleep deprivation to build mental toughness. Entrepreneurs like Tim Ferriss have publicly spoken about practicing poverty days, living on minimal resources for a weekend to conquer the fear of financial loss, inspired directly by Seneca. Athletes across the world use visualization of worst-case scenarios, the Stoic Premeditatio Malorum, to prepare for competition. And millions of ordinary people around the world are now taking cold showers, journaling, practicing intermittent fasting, and deliberately doing difficult things, not because they have to, but because they understand what the Stoics understood thousands of years ago. Comfort is a loan, and it collects interest. Here's the truth about the Stoic path. It's not popular. It doesn't trend on social media. It doesn't come in a beautiful packaging with a 30-day guarantee. But it works. It has worked for over 2,000 years, across cultures, across centuries, across every kind of human circumstance you can imagine. The Stoics weren't training to be miserable. They were training to be free. Free from the tyranny of comfort. Free from the paralysis of fear. Free from the fragility that comes from never being tested. And the beautiful irony? The people who regularly practice discomfort, who choose the cold shower, who fast, who wake up early, who have the hard conversation, they are often the most joyful, the most grateful, the most present people you will ever meet. Because they know, deeply and personally, that they can handle whatever life brings. And that knowledge, that unshakable inner confidence, is something no comfort in the world can give you. So the question isn't whether you can afford to practice discomfort. The question is, can you afford not to?